Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
What can we learn from people who have tried to commit suicide? In 3 words, there is hope. We'll hear the powerful stories of Kevin Hines, one of only 34 to survive a suicide attempt by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. And we'll also hear from world champion boxer Joe Williams. We'll hear how both men, who seem to have it all together, still battle the enemy within each and every day. Next on Wyoming Chronicle.
Hi guys, it's very nice to be here in Wyoming with all of you, and I do think it absolutely pertinent that right now, before I begin any kind of presentation words, we take a moment of silence for all of those your wonderful and lovely community has lost to suicide. Thank you. My name is Kevin Hines. This here is my great friend and a man I consider family and a brother, Joseph Williams. Joe Williams, I always do that. Told me not to call him Joseph. You guys, I live with what is known as a severe mental illness. Joe does too. A mental illness is really, if you think about it, much more than an illness. Across the globe, we consider illnesses really to be temporary. What Joe and I go through every day, and what some people I bet in this room go through every day, I believe are brain diseases. That means they're chronic, that means they affect you every day, and that means right now, here in this society, at this moment, there is no cure. But even though there's not a cure for these kinds of diseases that derive from the brain, there absolutely 110% is hope. And when you live with something like this, what Joe aptly applies to and writes on this shirt, an enemy within, when you live with something like that, just like in boxing, you gotta fight tooth and nail every day to survive, to stay here on this planet, and I promise you, it's worth it.
My entire life, I've battled with negative voices inside my head that tell me I'm not quite good enough, that I won't amount to anything in my life, and that I should just give up. Playing rugby at the top level, you come up against some fierce opponents. Boxing, in the boxing ring, as many guys that know, you come up against some fairly fierce guys, some tough opponents as well. But nothing will ever equate to the enemy that I fight within my own head every single day. Now that enemy almost won back in 2012. 2012, I was rocking back and forwards in the shower, on the floor in my home, and those voices were telling me that I didn't amount to anything in my life and that I don't deserve to be here anymore. In tossing that coin in my head, whether to believe it or not, I started to believe it and believed that I wasn't any good, that I was a burden to everyone, that my kids deserved better than me, and that every person I impacted on, I was doing no good for them. Now in that time, I have vivid flashbacks of that day every single day, I won't lie, every single day. I remember the smell in the air, I remember the song that was on the radio, and I certainly remember the voices that were in my head.
I've been fighting this battle for the better part of 20 years. Diagnosed at 17 in high school, junior year. I was very athletic myself. I played 3 years of high school Greco-Roman wrestling. I was a champion state wrestler at my high school. Played 1 year JV football. Also did the theater program. And it was in that theater program at 17 and a half, in front of 1,200 people and my entire crew on that play that I was on stage, that I had what doctors called my very first complete mental breakdown. And to explain that in detail, as it was happening in real time, I didn't know what was going on. I was paranoid beyond belief, thinking that everyone in that audience of 1,200 people, and it was packed, were out to hurt me, trying to get me, and trying to even kill me. I was in a distorted reality fear of my life, and it led me to have to leave that performance in high school right in the middle of it. I just walked off stage. Well, frankly, I ran because I thought they were coming. A battle that I still deal with even today.
That day I wrote letters to my kids and I explained that I'm sorry that I wasn't going to be there for the rest of their life. And I had a suicide attempt by a drug overdose, and I laid back and I was content that the voices were right, that everybody else deserved better that I could offer them. I was content that my kids would be better off without me and that everybody else that I made contact with would be better off without me. I just finished a 10-year rugby league career living in a small town, so I was like a celebrity in a small town. The National Rugby League is equivalent to the NFL out here. So you can imagine an NFL player living in a small country town whilst battling with mental illness. I was too proud to go out and tell anybody about it. I was too proud to ask anyone for help. And I believed that I wasn't good enough anymore and that I didn't deserve my place in life. And I had that suicide attempt and laid down and thought that my kids would be better off without me.
They got me to see a doctor, my very first psychiatrist. And much like many people in our society, I didn't know about these brain diseases. I didn't know what they did or where they came from, and I surely was in denial that I had one. And we're not leaving here until we try to touch at least one life and help one person choose a better, more beautiful path. Because guys, even though your community has been hit one of the hardest in America with suicide, I'm looking at you each. I'm going to look at every one of your eyes right now. It is not, I repeat, it is not the answer. My suicidal thoughts, sadly, you guys, I had to learn the hard way. I went to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, California. They call that bridge the 9th wonder of the world. It's touted as one of the most beautiful man-made structures ever created. But you guys, it has a darkened past. In the last 80 years, over 2,000 people have died by suicide from depression at that bridge. 36 people have survived that fall. I'm one. I'm number 26 of 36 to survive the 220-foot, 25-story, 4-second, 75-mile-an-hour fall from the Golden Gate Bridge. But that's not the important part of my story, guys. Listen very carefully. Here is the important part of my story. At the millisecond that my hands left that rail, because of voices in my head telling me I had to die, and they were wrong, but I didn't know it. At the millisecond my hands left that rail, much like 19 other people who survived that fall, the majority of the ones still alive, I had an instant regret of my action.
Every third day in Wyoming, someone commits suicide. We're blessed to be joined this afternoon at the Casper Boxing Club with Kevin Hines and Joe Williams, who have just given us all a powerful message. Tell me, how did you two meet? How did you come together?
We met in Australia through a mutual friend, a young lady named Lauren Breen, who was a suicide preventer in Australia, a dedicated advocate. And Lauren did lose her brother to death by suicide from depression. You know, we don't say committed anymore. We don't use that language. No offense to you, but we say died by suicide from depression, because committed is like committing an act, a violent act or criminal activity. And these people who suffer mentally with suicide, they're striving and wanting to live, but they believe they have to die because of their brains. And I met Joe through Lauren in Australia, where we met a great deal of these wonderful Australian young hip cats that are doing it every day in Australia to try to help people choose life, just like I do in America and around the world. And when we saw Joe and Lauren and all these other guys, we realized we had something amazing. And it was originally going to be a film, Suicide: The Ripple Effect is why we met, about America and my journey in helping people heal. But it became something much bigger. Something where I got to hear Joe's story for the first time, Lauren's story for the first time, and all these other people. And then it went around the world, and we're traveling, hearing these stories of hope. And hope is transformative. It's universal. When people lose it, they think of suicide. They die by suicide. But when people can get it back, when people can hear a message that we're giving, that anyone's giving, that's safe messaging, engaging, entertaining, and important for them, and relates to them in some way, they have a spark light in their minds. And oftentimes, as we've seen across the globe, people have come to us and said, we choose life because of that message you just said.
As we try to understand what happens with suicide, and there are people now watching this show that may be contemplating it, thinking about it in Wyoming right now, but may not know what to do. What do you want to tell those people right now?
Suicide isn't an option. It isn't an option, and things do get better. You know, I'm clearly inked with a fair few tattoos on my life, throughout my body about my life. But the most significant tattoo that I've got on my wrist is T2SP, which means this too shall pass. Every single tough moment that I've ever encountered in my life, every suicidal thought that I've ever had in my life has come to me, and I've gotten past it. So you don't have to be better and well 100% straight away, but things do improve if you just improve your life by 1% at a time.
Throughout the broadcast tonight, we're showing the telephone number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. We urge people to call that, whether they themselves or whether they know someone who may be contemplating suicide. And Kevin, for you learned and you told us when your hand left the Golden Gate Bridge that you knew it was a mistake, and that you knew that there were people that loved you and cared for you.
I said that, 36 people have survived that fall. It's 1% of the people who have attempted. And 4 have regained full mobility. I'm one. The moment I left that rail, I had an instant regret, because it went from contemplating suicide to in the act of. When you're in the act of, something happens to people biologically, scientifically really. Oftentimes, when people have a split second to see what's happening, they have a cognitive disconnect from what they're about to do, and they recognize through being shocked into reality from generally sometimes psychosis, mental illness, brain struggles. When they're shocked into that reality, they have an instant regret of their action. I had that same instant regret. 19 of the 36 survivors, there are only about 25 alive today, as the rest have died of natural causes over time. Bridge has been around for 80 years. 19 of the majority of those still alive today, all come forward to say instant regret. That's a message that rings clear to anyone around the world. because I hear the same message when people tell me they survived from ropes or any other means. We don't want to get into that, but I'll tell you, when people survive from their attempt, quite often around the world, not everywhere, not all the time, but a great deal of the time, they have that moment and they realize this could have just been the greatest mistake of their life.
Joe, you wrote a letter to your family and then survived.
Yeah, I wrote letters to my kids. I guess it was the only set of people that I could think about were my children, and I wrote letters to those kids, and I pretty much wanted them to know that things weren't their fault. That I wanted them to know that I'll always be by their side, but it'll be in spirit. I wanted them to know that I loved them, and I was sorry, but I just didn't feel that I could be around anymore. And what I was going through mentally was so horrific. The only way that I could lose the voices and the clutter within my ears was to end my life. I didn't want to die, but I just wanted the noise to go away. Thankfully it didn't work, and I survived. And in hearing that I was lucky to be alive, I made a distinct decision that every day I get to open my eyes, I want to make a positive impact on somebody's life throughout the world. I get to hold my kids every day. I get to tell them and be a loving father to them and educate them about mental illness, because I wasn't educated about it. For me, it was a battle that I didn't need to go through, but I was struggling with it at the time. I'm extremely thankful that I'm still here.
The striking message, though, to me, in hearing you both talk so candidly about your lives, is your struggle continues. It didn't end, and it goes on today. And I'm sure there are people in Wyoming watching right now that feel the same thing, that, my struggle's forever. So what's my value? What's your message to them?
For me, the most important thing I can say to anybody watching is that things do get better over time. You don't have to improve from 0 to 100% and make everything go away. What you have to concentrate on doing is the small things. Doing the small things and thinking about the moments that you're struggling in right now and just getting past those moments. If it's hour by hour, minute by minute, there's been days where I've sat and watched the clock tick by, second by second. But this too shall pass. Every single time it's improving your life just by 1%.
And with a great deal of hard work. There are so many things that Joe and I do every single day just to stay here, just to survive, okay? We exercise. We eat healthily most days, most meals. We sleep properly as often and every day we can. Sleep is the #1 additive and support to your mental stability, anyone's, whether you have an illness, a disease of the brain or not. Sleep is the most crucial for you to be well, for you to function, breathe right, all of these things. When you get adequate amounts of sleep and you're not an insomniac, insomnia leads to psychosis all by itself. You add that to the diseases Joe and I have, bipolar disorder, been diagnosed, it's a crisis waiting to happen.
Joe, we live in a state where the cowboy way is to pick yourself up, deal with things on your own, be a man, move forward, and get over it. What's your message to folks that are trying to do this on their own?
I'm a First Nations Aboriginal man from back home in Australia, and it's very, very similar to us back home, is that it's not often talked about. If you're struggling, there's no sign of weakness. If you're struggling mentally, that's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of struggling. When you're in pain, it's a sign of pain. These are the little things that Kevin and I speak about with our wellness that we have to improve every single day. It's the things that we pay attention to the most. Our wellness. There's things like medication. Medication isn't the only answer. Medication is an additive that helps us stay well. It's the exercise. It's the eating well. It's the caring and giving to others. It's the showing compassion and gratefulness for the things that we have. life improves. Life does improve, but it won't improve if you don't talk about it.
You guys are both tough guys, right? You're both you are.
I don't know about that.
You know,
You are.
They
But
say,
you both have reached out and gotten help.
They say in Australia they call it doing it tough, right?
Yeah.
They say when someone's going through the hell and they're keeping it inside, they're doing it tough and they're not telling anybody about it. Especially a lot of Australian and even
athletes.
Aboriginal men as well. And when you look at the male populations around the world, what are we told when we're kids? Quit crying. Don't be a sissy. Knock it off. Be a man. How many of us in this room were told that on a regular basis by our fathers? I was. You know, I'd cry and he'd say, Kevin, why are you crying all the time? And I would say, Dad, I'm just so sensitive. And he would say, well, get unsensitive. That didn't work. But he learned, just like my father, who didn't understand me as a kid, and I didn't understand him. I grew to learn who he really was and the great man that he was. My father, pessimistic, pragmatic, stone-faced man. Void of emotion, really, you know, on a lot of situations. Never saw the man cry until I went over that rail. And my father, through the book Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder by Julie Fast, learned how to treat his son. And he became the best man at my wedding. And there was no other option. Men, hear me clearly. Crying is physiologically natural. It comes from within because of pain. Sometimes it even comes from joy. Crying is natural, and to be a man doesn't mean you have big muscles, or you can lift big weights, or you can box great men. It means you're good to those who love you, and you're good to those you love. That's what it means.
You know, I was in a professional athlete program for some 15 years, and back home in Australia especially, and throughout the world, professional athletes and men that are professional athletes are seen to be tough and not to show any sign of weakness. I held it in for so long during my rugby league career in the NRL because I was afraid that if I spoke about it, I would be seen as a weakness to the team and I'll be put off the team. Now, if I had spoken out and empowered everyone else around me to learn about my mental illness, to then empower me to be a better person, maybe I would have been different.
I want to end the discussion with this question. You visit with people of influence, decision makers, who might be able to understand and make a difference with mental health services. What's your message to those folks about the importance of mental health services?
People who in this country are dying by suicide at a rate of 42,000 a year in America, who are around the globe dying by suicide at 800,000 a year annually, who are in this country, 1 in 4 persons suffers from a clinical diagnosed mental illness. What are we waiting for? To those legislators in every office that they hold. What are we waiting for? Why are we waiting for more of us to die by suicide from depression when all we need to do is find the money, keep it in mental and brain health, and give it to the people on the ground floor who can spread it around this world and save lives? It costs us taxpayers less money to help with prevention services over time than it does with postvention after a suicide.
Kevin, you've written about how you wished one person on that day you got on the bus would have said, "Can I help you?" but no one did. And I'm sure, Joe, that you maybe wished that people would have reached out to you. So I guess my question is, you must have a message of people to be courageous to help their fellow humans, their fellow friends, regardless of whether they know them or not, regardless of whether they're scared to or not, and how important and what a difference that can make.
I'll tell you something. We can give all the money in the world, we can give all the resources in the world to mental illness and saving lives. Suicide prevention starts around the kitchen table, in the home, with our relationships, noticing when our family members aren't travelling so well, noticing when our classmates in schools aren't travelling so well, noticing when our workmates aren't travelling so well. By stepping up and having that conversation in that time of need can save lives.
And it might just be, are you okay? Is that
Something
where it
wrong?
starts?
Can I help you? Look, if we're not anything else on this planet, we are our brothers and sisters' keeper. And it doesn't matter whether you know people, you're their friends, their family, or you don't know them at all. You see someone in pain, we must walk up, put the hand on their shoulder, and so they know you got their back. So they know you are behind them, and that when they go forward, you will help prop them up and get them out of that pain.
People are scared.
We're afraid. We're afraid for many reasons. We're afraid, oh, what if they get mad at me? What if they become violent? Look.
What if you save their life?
What if you save their life? What if your words, what if your smile changes the outcome of that terrible potentiality of suicide? And we know that a smile can change it. There was a man who went to the Golden Gate Bridge. He was in his 40s, and he wrote a note. And he said in that note, if one person smiles at me, I will not jump. May he rest in peace. How hard is it to smile at somebody sitting down in a great deal of pain? When I was on that bus, wanting for one person to look at me in pain, to see my pain, and to say something, a man looked at me and said, what the hell's wrong with that kid? It's time for a global change. Compassion, which is what Joe preaches, it's what he talks about in every presentation. Kindness for every man, woman, and child. Put away the hate, squash it. Put away the bigotry, squash it. Push forward the kindness and the empathy, and understand that everybody needs to cry.
The problem with a lot of our society is that everybody listens to reply. We should be listening to listen. Listen that our friends are going through problems. Don't listen to reply to see if our reply is better or good enough for the conversation. Take away the ego for a second. Show some compassion and put yourself in those shoes. This person is struggling with thoughts of suicide. They're fighting to stay alive.
Joe Williams and Kevin Hines, your message is one of the most powerful I've ever heard.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for
having
joining
me.
us on Wyoming
Bet.
Chronicle.
Thank you.